Happy Monday. How's it going, everybody?
It's going well.
Going well?
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
What'd you spend the weekend on, Joe?
Nothing at all. Nothing at all. No, it was we're just finishing up copywriting and stuff, so it's super fun. But yeah, but people hear enough about that. Let's talk about Emilie here. So Emilie, welcome to the Monday Morning Data Chat. How's it going?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you here. For people who don't know who you are, do you want to give an intro?
Yeah, happy to. Hello, happy Monday. My name is Emilie Schario. I am a data strategist in residence at Amplify Partners, a seed stage VC firm focused on technical founders. Prior to this, I was director of data at Netlify. Before that, I was the first data analyst at GitLab, joined the company at about 280 people, watched the company grow to over 1,300, and spent about a year as interim chief of staff to the CEO while we hired the chief of staff. So really got to watch a variety of experiences as the company grew there, and have been your first data hire at a myriad of places before that.
That's quite the resume. That's cool. So what stood out as one of the cooler experiences in your progression?
There's like the experiences that are like professionally cool because they really push you and you grow. And then there's just like that thing that happened that's like a novelty that you'll talk about for your career for the rest of forever, right? And so like there was 1 week where we had 42 people start on the same Monday at GitLab. And it's like, whoa, 42 new hires in the same week.
Well, they're all remote too, right? GitLab is a remote first company.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
before COVID, back before it was cool to be remote. So
yes, before it was cool. I joined GitLab in June 2018. Taylor Murphy, who's head of product at Meltano, actually hired me into GitLab. And I didn't meet anyone in the company until that August or September when we had our first company offsite. And that was in South Africa. They flew the whole company in. Everyone came in from all over the world, people coming from Australia and from Amsterdam and from the US, and really global thing came into South Africa. Then everyone goes home and gets sick for a week because that's how those things work. But yeah, it was like 3 months before I met anyone, and then didn't see anyone in person for the most part for another 9 months until our next offsite. And so all remote, but definitely focused on building relationships. And I think one thing GitLab did really well on that front was really formalize a lot of informal communication. And so a lot of my thinking about how we build effective data teams is really leaning on how did GitLab build an effective remote organization back before it was cool. And one of them was this idea of like a virtual coffee chat. And so let's get 30 minutes on the calendar or 25 minutes on the calendar. We're not going to have an agenda. We're not going to talk about work. But I want to know about you and who you are, and like, do you drink orange juice or apple juice with your breakfast, and what's your favorite cereal and things like that, so that when we hop in a call to talk about work, we already have this relationship between the two of us.
And I think the reality is too, often we don't have to talk on calls. We don't have to jump on calls if we can be efficient over Slack, but you still need that FaceTime to connect with other human beings. We found that too. We do something similar daily, where at least we've gotten into this habit, because otherwise like people just don't connect.
It's like a afternoon water cooler chat. Yep. So we call it back. I don't even know why it's called water cooler, because nobody has those anyway. but that's what we call it. So that's interesting. And I mean, so one thing that when we were talking before the show, one thing that caught my attention was this notion. You use this phrase service trap, and this is something that data teams might get into. Can you explain what that is?
So I like to think about it in the context of IT teams, because it feels like the example that everyone can kind of map onto their experiences, independent of where you worked or independent of previous experiences. It's like, I have a problem. I'm going to submit a ticket. It's going to go into a void. I'm not going to know anything about it. And then eventually I'm going to get a response with like, maybe the thing I asked for was done. Maybe there are more clarifying questions and there are going to be next steps. So I think of that as like the teams who work and operate in that model of like, here's a question. I need something from you. I don't want your expertise. I just want this thing done. And then the person pushing back the answer or the okay, this is done now. And think about it like how many times in companies have we seen people like, oh, I got locked out of my email, or I forgot my 2FA or whatever. Like, that is the service trap. And it's where you are just stuck answering questions for other people over and over and over. So when we think about that in the context of the data team, it's a world where the business is just asking questions of the data team, and the data team feels like it's their job to just like try to run through this series of answers. And they hate to break it to you, but it's a hamster wheel they're never going to get off.
It sounds like a help desk or something.
That's exactly what it is.
And what's the difference between that and building expertise? You said earlier, I don't want your expertise. I just want you to answer my question.
It's the difference between a question that's like, how many people signed up last week versus what drove the biggest change in signups last week.
Got it. And so the tendency in the service trap is that you answer ad hoc questions instead of like building things that are going to be useful for the long term, perhaps. Is that a good way to phrase it?
It's certainly part of that's a way to think about it. I think about it more as like there's this framework for analysis that I've written about before. That's like reporting, insights, predictions, right? And so reporting is just like a level one, what was the number, or it's nothing like groundbreaking. It's just like, what is the thing that happened? And while it's important to have those facts in as you think about your org and make decisions, they don't really move the needle that much. What really moves the needle is insights. And it's providing the business with additional information, not just on the what happened, but the why did it happen, right? And so not just how many people signed up last week, but which source brought in the biggest change in signups. That is much more interesting, because if we have people coming from Reddit and Twitter and YouTube and whatever signing up every week, but last week we had 2x as many people come from Twitter, like what is going on there that we need to dig into and understand and see what's driving that change. And that is a much more useful use of everyone's time rather than just like, oh, signups were up. I think that's the difference.
I think that's a good delineation. What are you gonna say, Matt?
Just I was going to ask a follow-on question. So, do you think we've seen companies emphasize the insights and predictions more during COVID and on versus just simple reporting? So, starting in 2020, did we see a shift in how companies were interested in data? I wonder.
I'm curious why you're asking the question. Like, do you have opinions there?
I kind of do. I'm curious if you have some observations. I think in theory, for many companies don't really feel like they have to predict, right? They feel like their business just kind of hums along, does the same thing. And all of a sudden with COVID, we saw this with many of our clients, the rug was pulled out from under them. And for many businesses did better, but in ways that were completely unpredictable and unpredicted. And even the reporting became very, very tricky suddenly.
I don't know that I would say a lot changed in terms of like practicality on the ground. I 1,000%. The models that you used to predict before, throw them out the window, because there was no COVID parameter, global pandemic parameter in your linear regression, and your predictions were off. But I think most data teams and the more leaders, I just hopped off a call with someone this morning who their data team tripled over the last 2 years. So the company doubled, but the data team tripled. The company's really investing in data at the organization, and they want people to feel like there's plenty of access to data expertise. But they just also feel like they're still on this hamster wheel. And so our conversation was very much about like, how do we start moving out of this, and where do we start impacting the business? And what I saw leading the org at Netlify was that the more you can avoid answering questions for people. The more you push information out to the business, the more space you get to push more information out. And so if people are getting a steady stream of information from the data team, they will create space for the data team to ask more questions, or for the data team to push more information out to the org. And so it's like this cycle that, like, once you get off the hamster wheel and you start impacting the business proactively, it becomes easier to do that over time. But in the beginning, it is very hard to break off that hamster wheel at first.
I like this idea of pushing data and insights to the business, because I don't see this paradigm often enough. Let's say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
The trap is everywhere.
It is. And I have this note here where it's kind of the distinction between like being reactive as a data team and being proactive. And I think pushing is obviously inherently a proactive activity. This is interesting, but to kind of reverse it, I would ask, why do you think the business views data as basically the equivalent of an IT help desk? Because I ask this question a lot too. So I'm curious.
I don't know that I have like the definitive answer here, other than like, I mean, I would flip it back to you. I'll share what my thoughts, my first reaction here is, and then I'll flip it back to you because I'm curious in your work what you see with your clients. But I think it has a lot to do with how data teams get started, which isn't that like an executive often believes in data, and so they proactively hire an analytics engineer, and they set up a stack, and they're like, okay, go find stuff and help drive business strategy, right? What happens is we're just seeing that retention isn't what we were hoping for. We launched this feature and it's just not getting the usage. So we want to better understand our users, or we want to better understand our customer acquisition costs. And so they go out and they hire that analytics engineer, but there's already a backlog of questions that we now want this person to answer. And now they're in the service trap on day one. Oh, Joe, you're muted.
Looks like yeah. Oh, well, there we go.
Mic trap. Mariah has a question here. What's up, Mariah? She was on the Friday show. She's awesome. She says, I have a question. So our company has a BI team without data engineers. How can we support a reporting team by providing them? I don't think that's the word you intend.
Relevant.
Relevant. Yeah. Okay. Relevant data sets without throwing off our own product roadmaps. Any thoughts on this?
I'm curious about what your product roadmap is and how it aligns to like the business strategy, because like your work, everyone should be marching in the same direction, right? Like the whole organization should be moving the needle on whatever the big North Star for the company is. And so we should all be working on the same direction. These things should be very, it should be a Venn diagram with a lot of overlap.
Yeah. Hopefully like a perfect union or something. So
in an ideal world.
Yeah.
But tech debt, CI/CD improvements, like there's always going to be a little bit out there that's only important to the data team, and you have to do that work. You just have to make sure you're marching in the same direction as everyone else first.
Yeah, I would also ask, like, why is the team structure set up this way? Because it would seem that a BI team should have the support it needs from engineers, and preferably analytics or data engineers. And so I'd be curious how the BI team gets its data, and also what their goals are as a team. Like, obviously you have a BI team, so what is their purpose? Are they supported, or are they basically a help desk? So, and sorry if my dog's barking, there's a arborist outside. So I don't know. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, part of the problem here might be that BI teams can be a lot of different things, right? BI teams can be all the way from, on one hand, analytics engineering, to maybe we shift over a bit to reporting, to just running ad hoc SQL queries for service purposes, like you were saying, Emily. So is there kind of a collaboration aspect to this when we talk about getting out of the service trap? In other words, instead of responding to the tickets, do you want to sit down with the stakeholders and say, here are some insights that we can look for? And how have you seen that work in practice?
So I think the place to start is with a question, which
Mhm.
is, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Right? So when people come in and they say, how many people logged in on Monday morning? Right? It's what is the question you're trying to solve? And I think we've all seen like someone ask for technical help in like Slack or on a forum, and they're like, how do I subset this string? Right? And it's like actually the thing they want to do is parse where people came from, and they think that if they subset the string, they'll solve that problem. But understanding the problem they're trying to solve is really important before we make recommendations.
For sure. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of like 5 whys. I write a lot about this. I think data people need to be a lot more, I think, be better at interrogating the question behind the question. There's always some other, because I think inherently most people, including probably all of us, we're not that great at asking questions first try sometimes, but for the most part, people, I would say as a rule, you should expect people are going to ask like a poor question out of the gate. And so you really do need to dig into that more and understand what's, like you say, what's the goal? What are you trying to do? So Mariah actually gives some clarity as to what she's, so she says, so let's say product innovation versus insights. So we don't have a good pipeline for insights versus fixing customer experience and adding new features. So that's what she's referring to. So if you have any thoughts or insights there?
I think this raises another interesting question or issue maybe, which is that data engineers and analysts really tend to be kind of coders. In other words, we like playing with technology, and even if we have a background in stats or applied math or something, we don't always have the insights to ask the right questions. To your point.
Well, and in fact, I would say that stats and math nerds tend to be maybe you approach things from first principles you're trained to, but I would also say that because you have such powerful tool sets at your disposal, you're almost the worst person to try and figure out how to solve the problem, because you're just going to approach it with a brute force method out of the gate. So.
Well, I think there's something too, like I see teams a lot of times when they get stuck on hard problems, they focus on like, let's improve our CI/CD, or let's add a linter to the repo. Right? And when I get into like what's actually happening here, it's that it is easier to engineer, right? To like really do the technical thing and get it done and check it off than it is to sometimes dig into this like messy business problem where you're not really sure what the ask is and what the analysis you need to do. And there's like 40 features and it can all be variations of whatever. And so, and inevitably it's like a circular project. There's no clear start or end, right? And so making sure that we're focused on business impact instead of getting the thing done and closing the ticket and moving on to the next one is how we make sure we're working on the right things.
Well, and I think back to your experience at GitLab, one thing that I always felt was a really good way to, I think, solve problems was get to know the people who are asking the questions. So in a lot of cases, go to lunch with people, get to know what they do for work and also what kind of makes them tick. I found that short circuits a lot of conversations because when they have problems, you know the context and you know how to talk to this person, right? So you kind of know, okay, what's their personality? Do they want quick answers? Are they more like a systems 1 type thinker or a systems 2 type thinker? But to bring it back to Dan Kahneman, but it's getting to know the personality of the person asking as well, which is like it or not, we all talk about how we want to be data driven, but a lot of it's personality driven too. It's just kind of how it is. So yeah, it's interesting. Actually, Alberto has a good question here. How do you size a data team? Scope, focus, support depend on company culture for a company size, something like that. Basically, how do you size a data team based on company culture and size?
I think a good rule of thumb is between 3 to 10% of your company headcount should be dedicated to data. More if you've got data products or your data team is building information that goes into production systems. For example, a lot of data teams are responsible for consumption billing processes or consumption billing numbers. Then you need to be at the higher end. You also want to be in the like medium to high end early on. And as you build out your core data sets, that percentage will go down a little. So that's number 1. And then number 2 is as you think about that percentage, you want to make sure your data team isn't rolling up wholly to G&A. So when we think about how companies manage their budgeting and their financial planning, companies definitely usually think about them in 3 categories: G&A, R&D, and sales. And so R&D is research and development, G&A is general and administrative, and then sales. And sometimes sales is sales and marketing. When you think about your data team's headcount, I recommend that they are essentially reporting locally prioritized. So they should report into someone who is in the data org, but they should be a part of that marketing team. They should go to the marketing team meetings. They should have context on the marketing team work. They should understand the problems that the marketing team is looking to drive or to solve. And if that's the case, their headcount should be funded by marketing. So the whole data org should not roll into just G&A just because they all report into G&A. You have their headcount funded by the part of the business who they are moving the needle for.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And how often do you see this happening? So, for example, data people going to marketing meetings. I ask because I haven't seen it a lot, but it sounds like a fantastic idea.
It was the model that we used at Netlify, and it worked really well because, like our analytics engineer who spent her time focused on finance, she was in the finance team meetings. And so when new things came up, she could reprioritize because she had context on the problems. She didn't have to go ask questions and get clarity. She could anticipate what was coming as she planned her roadmap and her vacation. The same thing was true of our product analysts. So we had 2 data analysts who supported product, and we had an analytics engineer who supported growth. And they could manage those relationships directly because they had context. They knew what experiments were coming. They knew what the problems that needed to be solved were, and they were just a part of those organizations.
Would you ever rotate people around different functions?
Ooh. I think some functions are probably a little bit more amenable to that than others. So experimentation is a very specific expertise, right? You need a certain level of statistical knowledge. You need familiarity with A/B testing. That one's going to be a little bit harder to rotate. And then finance, where you have a lot of jargon and revenue recognition versus the difference between AAR and revenue and those sorts of things, it gets hard to rotate. But I love the idea of a tour of duty and giving everyone the chance to develop those skill sets. It probably depends on the skill sets of the team to start, and then how that evolves over time, and whether or not there's interest, right? If people aren't interested in rotating, maybe we shouldn't rotate them if they really like those relationships and it's going well. I don't know. I'd probably try it and see how it goes. Have you seen that done well?
I would see this in finance, actually, and accounting departments. So in a lot of cases, it's a way to detect fraud, right, in practices. So you would rotate people or have them take a forced time off, so you could have other people audit the function and make sure there's not embezzlement or something like that. So that's and plus it also means especially in a hot job market, say people just peace out, do something else for fun. You're not totally screwed. Yeah. So
actually at GitLab, we like to not call it the bus factor because that kind of has some sad connotation. So for folks who are watching and don't know, it's in case someone gets hit by a bus, you don't want to be screwed. So we called it the lottery factor.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Actually, one time my car was hit by a bus and my boss came driving by the other way and he's like, "Did you just get hit by a bus?" And I was like, "Yep, sure did."
But you're still with us.
Still, yeah.
And
you did not win the lottery.
That did happen. Yeah. The bus side clipped my car and I was like, "What the hell?" So anyway, that was a lot of fun. Got some good questions here. And Viola would love to know more about reporting insights, predictions.
If I post a link in the chat, is that something you can share, Joe?
Yeah. If you put it in private chat, I'll just put it on LinkedIn or add it to the LinkedIn chat if you're on it.
I don't have that tab open, mostly because I was afraid of an echo.
Oh, no worries.
Hearing my own voice, who needs to do that? But here is, so this is that blog post that I mentioned.
Let me just put this in the chat for everybody here. I'll put it on YouTube as well.
Thank you. So I generally think about it as your data team, as you come up to speed and mature with the business, you need to start with reporting. So this is just like, we need to match the numbers that people are already used to seeing. So if, reporting is currently being driven out of Salesforce for our sales organization, and they're seeing that we've got 20 opportunities open or 200 opportunities open, like, how do they get that number? Let's match that number. It might be that there's a problem with that number, but we need to explain what the problem with that number is. So that's number one. I call this toll paying, in that, like, it's not great. It doesn't necessarily create anything new for the business, but it does align and get everyone on the same page for what the data team is saying. And then insights, this is like the net new thing that the data team creates. And it's from a combination of factors. It's multiple data sets coming together that there currently aren't analyses coming from. So maybe you're bringing Salesforce and product usage data, and you're combining them together to do this other thing. So that's kind of step two, insights. And predictions. People hear predictions and they think like machine learning. And I'm like, no, that chart that goes and it has numbers and it goes like that, it's just like up and to the right. Just like keep drawing that line. That is your predictions for now. Like you can get there at some point, but right now, like just start with extending the line outward. Or you're growing 5% every week. Like, just assume you're going to keep growing at that rate for a little bit longer. And figure out, like, make business assumptions, jot down what they are, store them someplace, understand what assumptions you're building into your model, but just like, don't overcomplicate things, solve the business problem in front of you. I need a better way to say this, but a line that anyone who's ever worked for me has heard before is like, we're not solving world hunger here. And what I mean by that is like, let's not overcomplicate what we're trying to do or try for a solution that's unrealistic. We can just focus on what's the smallest thing we can do right now that's going to provide a business impact and give people more information than they have today. And so that they can take an action, get feedback, and we can adjust appropriately.
But for the predictions part, how do data teams figure out where to look for, for insights? How do data teams figure out where to look for insights? Because you can dig through data and find all kinds of things. Only a small slice of those things is actually useful to the business. So how do you locate those insights?
So anything you find, I think, can be insightful. So that's number one, and we'll dig into that in a second. But number two, is that I think the best place to start finding an insight is like adjacent to the thing you were asked to do. And so starting with number one, if someone says, where did our new signups come from? Or like we noticed a big spike in signups from Reddit, like which subreddit, is that the right language? I don't use Reddit. I don't know why I've got Reddit on the brain today, but which subreddit sent us all this traffic? Like if that's the question, you can't find a pattern, like there's just a bunch of them, then like, I don't know, Reddit is the one that drove the traffic, but there's no pattern in the subreddits. Like that is an insight, right? Yep. No pattern is insightful. And so like any piece of information that we didn't have before, but can help shape the business or help shape the way we think of an answer to the problem, like that needs to be thought of as insightful. We can't just say like, if it doesn't move the needle 3%, it wasn't insightful enough, right? And then the second piece, the second piece around like, how do we go looking for insights? The way I coached my team to move out of the service trap at Netlify was, like every other team, we'd started in that context of there were a million asks for us from a bunch of different parts of the org. And so we're answering other people's questions. And what I would coach people to do is take this insight take this question that you were asked and just like turn it 15%. Like you were asked about the pricing page. And so you're going to be doing an analysis on the pricing page anyway. I want you to look at the paths that drive people to the pricing page? And is one path more likely to convert than another? Or you're looking at people who use this feature and their retention at the 7-day mark, but look at their retention at the 14 and 30-day marks too. Like, just take that analysis and shift it a little and then push that information out. And now what you've done is you've taken the question you were asked, you've hopefully helped someone understand an actual problem that they were trying to solve and move the needle for them there. But you've also found something else that you can push to the business. And even if the answer is we found that like 7-day retention and 14-day retention were exactly the same, we don't have anything new to push out, like, that is an insight.
Right.
And it's going to shape what the business does with that. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, based on my experience, because I think most of us who've had the title, say data scientist, which we'll come back to in a second, have actually done a lot of analytics
Matt,
work.
you dog.
Yeah, exactly. But this means in practice that you get asked to generate a report, and often as you're building the report, you're like, what is this thing I see in the data? And you can either ignore that and just send the report out, or you can send the report and then dig deeper and come back and say, hey, this looks kind of interesting. Do you care?
Well, that's a good point, though, Emily. I think in a lot of cases, analysts are incentivized to try and search for novelty, when really the novel answer is that things are going pretty well, actually.
When they don't change.
So, it's just you got to be objective about reality. But I think also, though, it's like, oh, well, I found this interesting nugget of stuff, right? So it becomes almost this like treasure hunt, when really the job is just, okay, so how are we doing, and and why, versus I think trying to cherry pick things that might make you look good in front of an audience. I see this happening, I would say, not infrequently. So
do y'all use RSS feeds to subscribe to blogs?
Not anymore.
No?
Used to.
I must be last person standing over here.
So on Reddit uses RSS. Do you use you get Reddit through RSS?
No, I don't use Reddit at all. But so imagine a world, forget RSS feeds exist. Yeah. There was a point in time where there was like some blog you liked so much where you would like go to the site and type the domain in and just like refresh to see if there was anything there. And maybe you came back to it when there wasn't anything and you'd refresh again, right? And what is a blog but like a feed of information in reverse chronological order, right? So at Netlify, we started this internal, for lack of a better term, data team blog. And it wasn't internal to the data team, it was internal to the company. And what we would do is take these insights that we were finding and put them on this internal blog. So this was inside of our company handbook. It was an 11T site hosted with Netlify, but you had to have like Netlify SSO to log in. And so what we found after doing this for a couple weeks, very quickly, we had a full blog of insights. And it was just like, take this analysis you're already doing and turn it a little bit on its side. Whatever your conclusion is, like, we're going to publish that to the internal blog. And the headline is just going to be your takeaway. So sometimes the takeaway is going to be 30-day retention, not indicative of, buying pens black or blue, whatever it might be. But very quickly, what we found is that executives throughout the company were refreshing that internal blog every single day, multiple times a day. And they were just like waiting for the data team to push out more information, even when the information was, this is not significant, or this didn't affect this, or this feature is not correlated with usage, or whatever. But like, doesn't matter. The thing that isn't important is just as important as the things that are, because we don't want to spend our time on the things that don't move the needle for the business.
It's interesting too, though, because once again, this is an insight about sharing information, about socialization, is about organization, rather than, partially it's about the data itself, but it's about how you communicate that data, which again, so often gets ignored, I think.
Just got a question here. Tyler Hillary. What's up, Tyler? He's interested to hear your thoughts about Tristan Handy's recent statement. I think that there is too little scrutiny of the value of data teams today. Yeah, let's talk about this.
I too read Tristan's analytics engineering roundup yesterday, which now I'm really glad I did, because I don't always get to read them on Sundays. But I'm glad I did. I don't know that I agree. I think there's a lot of talk on data team tooling, but I probably care a little bit less than around what the business thinks and more around, excuse me, can data teams articulate the value of their impact to the business? I know the last 2 talks I've given at Coalesce last year and the year before, I talked about how we think about data team ROI, because this is something that I've cared about for a long time. But I think I challenge more data people to be able to tie their work to business impact, and less of excuse me, less of us being worried about the business per se and how the business articulates that. The other thing too is like when things are going great, like the like Tristan said, the macroeconomics are great and there's plenty of VC funding and things are going well for companies, then like it's easy to not worry about efficiencies. And then as things get tighter, efficiencies become more of a concern for businesses. So it's great that people are thinking about it, but I've always had this top of mind in the first place.
Yeah, I've always been. I mean, I've always worked for mostly companies that are profitable and run one. So efficiencies are always top of mind. Like if you aren't making money, then well, then I guess you're not adding value. So it's pretty binary, right? So, but and Matt and I always joke too. It's like, okay, so your accountant, I don't think they really need to tell you, oh, am I adding any value to you? It's like you want your taxes done or not, or you want your books reconciled, or no? If you don't, that's fine. So. But data is one of these things, I think, yeah, you're right. Or I'm always a fan of like show, don't tell. So if you have to tell me that you're adding value and having to scream it from the rooftops, it's probably an inverse correlation with the amount of value you're really adding. Because if you have to keep telling me this, then, I just might be trying too hard. I don't know. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of have a question. I think my observation is that especially in kind of the peak Hadoop era, we saw a lot of this, what you would call, Joe, cargo culting of technology, where even small companies are like, oh, Hadoop is going to solve all these problems. And then you'd have a technology focused team that would build out the stack. And there really actually wasn't much focus on doing something with the stack, delivering insights, delivering predictions. Has that changed much now that technology stack is less popular? Are we more focused on the value of data versus the technology itself?
Well, I mean, do you think that data teams have a lack of options for data tooling?
That's all we can do is laugh, right?
It's like, yeah, all right.
You no longer need to hire 4 engineers to get started.
But you might need to hire a data scientist. You have some pretty good opinions on data scientists. Want to talk about that?
You don't want to hire them. So to put a bow on that thought, like the one thing I will say is that we should all, independent of your job title, independent of what you do at a business, you should be able to articulate the value that you're bringing to the company. Right? When we think about what a resume is and those bullet points that you put under your title, it should all be about how you move the needle. And then as a manager, your version of that is what your team moved the needle on. And so we need to be doing this regularly, independent of whether we're on the data team, the accounting team, or the janitorial staff. Like, what is the value that you created for the company and how did you move the needle? And with data teams, if your impact to the business is better decision making, nobody sits around and is like, Joe made this decision using data. Matt made this decision using data. But we know the impact that we have to the business when people feel it. There's a great blog post by Barry McCardle, CEO of Hex, where he talks about like data team ROI, and I'd suggest everyone give that a read. Cool. Data scientists. Let's talk about data scientists. So
we don't want controversy on this show.
No. Hopefully, actually, this isn't controversial. Like that's what I would love to say. But what do data scientists do? Exactly.
Well, let's take a step back. What is a data scientist?
Yeah,
exactly.
So I really dislike the job title data scientist because every person, every role, every company has a different definition of data scientist. And I saw this earlier on in my career where for a couple of different roles, I was their first data person. And what I would see is these companies would say like, oh, we need data. We don't know what that means. So we're going to go out and hire a data scientist and they'll like figure it out. And I've seen that go wrong enough times where that was the first thing to kind of make me a little bit skeptical of the job title. Then there was that blog post that came out of Lyft back in 2018. That's what's in a name. And they say we're rebranding all of our data analysts to data scientists. So that was like the second thing that made me skeptical. And then the third, so I did a lot of hiring in my last couple of roles. And whenever I would interview data people, they'd have this job title of data scientist. I'd always early on in the interview say like, so your resume says you were a data scientist, like, tell me what you did for the business. And what I was asking here was like, were you writing complex modeling and algorithms, or were you doing reporting? And it's not that one is better than the other. They're just two functionally different things, right? So I think about the work we're doing as data teams, where we're centralizing on like, what is the definition of customer? My AirPods are fighting me now. What is the definition of customer, right? We want the whole business to say customer and mean the same thing. And we centralize on the definition of revenue, and we centralize on one meaning for refunds. And so if we're standardizing on this language for these things that are important, why wouldn't we also centralize on job titles that make sense?
Yeah, there's been a lot of title drift. And to Tiago's point, and if you're in LinkedIn comments, a lot of data scientists ended up being data engineers as well. So that they were doing things like writing MapReduce jobs or writing SQL queries and orchestration.
Yeah. Mike Rago also says, what's up, Mike? A data scientist is someone who codes in a lab coat, ? Yeah, you're scientists. Yeah. So actually get the podcast coming out with Mike and Kevin Hu this week. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, it's interesting. I've always... I too have had an aversion to data scientists. I think I remember the first, I kept hearing it in the early 2010s. And back then it meant somebody who was doing machine learning, basically, or making feeble attempts to do it, because it was actually pretty hard back then. It's way easier now. But so an analyst for the longest time was actually a 4-letter word. Like if you were not cool, if you're and in fact, a lot of my data scientist friends were claiming, oh yeah, BI and data and analytics is going to disappear with ML. I have my own theories about that nowadays, but that's a different topic. But then I just started noticing title drift for sure. I think around like 2013, 2014, right when deep learning was the cool thing coming up, and everyone wanted to become a data scientist. Companies were just overloading the term, so everything was a data scientist at some point, and it was no more of a scientist than maybe like, an artist is a sandwich artist at Subway. If you know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, it's just title overloading. And it got to the point where I kind of took a quip and said like data science is neither. So think about that one for a second. But
my hope is that this is a very non-controversial idea really soon. I would really love to see us centralize around job descriptions that make sense. And so what I say is, data engineers move data from outside of your ecosystem in and manage your infrastructure. Analytics engineers work with data within your ecosystem. Data analysts focus on surfacing insights for the business. And then machine learning engineers build prediction models and productionize those. And so within that, like that covers all of your bases, and maybe people have specialties, like someone's focused on finance or someone's focused on sensitive data or whatever it might be. But like one of those 4 should cover 90% of the use cases.
Right. I think that's fine. That fits, I think, approximately what Matt and I've come up with for titles as well. That whole kind of continuum. And so analytics it's always been about insights, and ML, it's just, I think it's more of a continuum from like, as you said, with, reporting to predictive. Whether or not that includes ML, I think it's a different story. I was doing predictive modeling without ML way back in the day too. So it is possible you can do this.
Here's a question.
Oh,
go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say a lot of your valuable modeling is just basic techniques like linear regression, which was your point earlier, Emily. Like, can you fit a line to it and see what it predicts?
So, question for you. I had an internet spat with someone about this.
Okay.
Is a linear regression machine learning? I said no.
No, it isn't.
That's what I like. You can do it in Excel. These finance bros, like, they will tell you that they're doing linear regression, but are they doing machine learning? I said no. And then I was told, like, well, if you have to import scikit-learn, doesn't that make it machine learning?
No, it doesn't. I would say where machine learning would begin maybe is if you take Tom Mitchell's classic definition of it. It's something that learns from experience and is able to produce outputs based upon the experience that it's and that and the tasks that has been given. But that's not. But that implies that you've created a model of some sort based on linear regression, and then that can live in the wild and perform predictions on its own. I would say that could arguably be a machine learning model, but that's more of a workflow question and a training question versus a mathematical implementation, which is just basically a slope plus some constants, right? I mean, that's literally all it is, and you're just fitting error to it. Like that's but that's not machine learning. I mean, if that is, then I suppose all of mathematics could arguably be machine learning. And Matt, I'm pretty sure you'd have an opinion on this since you do math.
I mean, it's funny. I think you could argue that a lot of machine learning techniques come down to transforming and featureizing data somehow so you can linearize it and then do some high dimensional linear regression on it. But like if you can do it in Excel, or even if you can do it with some basic scikit-learn functions, then I have to question if it's machine learning. But to me, it feels slightly fuzzy just because so much of real machine learning is based on linear techniques, but with a bunch of other stuff wrapped around them, if that makes any sense. So
got a question. Yeah, so it's I think we're in violent agreement, and again, I agree. I don't think that it is that controversial. I think it's more. I think people want to cling to titles, and so that's.
Well, I think there's actually an underlying thing, which is there's this almost hierarchy that people think machine learning is more cool than analytics, and so the push to like, oh well, this is also machine learning, or like. Linear regression is machine learning because I do linear regression and that makes me cooler than someone who just does analytics. I think that's like the subtext here. But I'm with y'all that it's not.
There's kind of a cultural phenomenon here too, and that is that these definitions keep shifting because the technology keeps shifting. And so I think in 2015, had you asked a lot of people, it would be, if there's enough data that I need a big data system to do it, even if it's a simple technique, then it's probably machine learning. But the thing is, in 2022, like 7 years later, you can just run a SQL query in a cloud data warehouse and you could scan a petabyte of data. Is that now suddenly machine learning? It's kind of the same techniques we were using, although they're far, far easier than they were in 2015.
I think just ML is one of these things where, in 10 years, I mean, it already is basically, right? I mean, your phone has a lot of ML running in the background. Yeah. I mean, basically every application, try taking a photo that uses ML behind the scenes to optimize it. And so it's just one of those things where I hope that it's sort of, you're not talking about machine learning in the same way you talk about electricity right now. It's something you just take for granted. It's part of the everyday workflow. And that's just kind of how it is. To me, it's always just been another tool, that you can use when you need it. And I think people should know at least how machine learning works and, have fun with it. But it's I would say no better or no different than anything else. Like deep learning is no different than a bar chart in a lot of cases. It's just a tool that you can use for stuff. It's how do you want to solve it?
If we're focusing on business impact, like that is the thing that we should use to measure success, right? And so it's not
a bar chart.
Well, I mean, if that bar chart moves the needle more than a fancy ML model, then like it was much more impactful, and that's the thing that matters.
Yep, agree, for sure. I guess kind of zooming out, like you're in the VC space now. I mean, where do you see things going over the next 2-3 years in the data world?
It's
a broad question, I know. But.
It is a broad question. I think I'm gonna join the bandwagon. Consolidation is coming. I've been talking about consolidation for a while, and I think like the thing that really sold me on consolidation was my time at GitLab and seeing how much more efficient our DevOps process could be using one tool. And so I hated that something broke in production in the data world. A DBT test fails, and you have to go through 5 tools to go figure out where the thing is broken, right? So consolidation is definitely coming. I'm not new in saying that. But the thing that I'm more excited about is, we've got this proliferation of tools. You've got a tool for everything under the sun, it feels like. You've got options for tools for problems that we didn't even think existed 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
More importantly, like, tools are great, but tools are nothing if we can't have careers and practitioners growing in their jobs and career paths for what impact to the business looks like. And how do you spend 5 and 10 and 15 years in your career growing and developing in the modern data stack? And so that is the piece that I'm really excited to see where that goes. And how do people have impactful careers that don't require them to like do the thing and then just go back to a smaller company and do it again? And I talk about it with people, and it's like, what does a career for a person who's been director of data or VP of data look like? I can't get a good answer because there's a lot of like shoulder shrugging. And so I'm looking forward to data teams being more impactful. So we have more C-level executives, and we see data teams being part of the conversations at companies sooner.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of hope that it's the same way that we just talked about machine learning, where it's just sort of it just is what it is. And that's why I hope data teams are. It's not the data team. It's just, we're making, impactful decisions on data, and these people happen to be helping us and be very instrumental in that. Yeah. So, it's like, all companies should be data companies in theory, but
I asked someone a question once, like, what should your first, actually, Max Boschman of Airflow fame, I asked him, like, what should your first data hire be? And his response to me was, early in a company, every person you hire needs to be a data hire. And I think about this all the time. But what he was saying is like, yeah, you're hiring a marketer or you're hiring a finance person. But like at that stage, they all have to be thinking about things through a data lens. And so I'm looking forward to seeing a lot more companies where that's the norm. And it's not like, oh, we have to set up our data function post Series A because that's where we are in a business and that's when you do it. It's much more of like, no, data is just a way of working for our organization.
It sets you up so much more nicely down the road too. Because you're not going against this like sort of a maturity index, like,
cultural.
Well, here's where I'm supposed to be right now in my age of company and size. It's silly.
Well, and the tools are so much more accessible too. I think in the early like 2010s, you were talking about either standing up like a Postgres server to be a data warehouse or something if you want to do serious data, which was a big overhead expense. Or you were talking about buying a very, very expensive, commercial product for data, or you were talking about Excel. And now you can just go turn on Redshift and it takes 5 minutes and you can actually have a data warehouse as a company of 5 people very easily.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, I know you got to jet in just a bit, so we'll wrap it up a bit early. Thanks for being on the show. Hope to have you on again. I love chatting with you. I feel like we can just keep chatting for days.
Yeah.
So
thanks for having me. If people want to follow up, I'm terrible at email and terrible at LinkedIn messages, but I hang out in Locally Optimistic a lot. And so if people want to ping me there or DM me, I'm more than happy to chat about any of these things.
Awesome. Good group too. If you aren't part of Locally Optimistic, join it. It's awesome. Lots of data people. I think asking really good questions and having great conversations. They sometimes chime in on really nerdy topics. So I don't know if that scares you away from the more than anything. So awesome. Yeah, and just to plug an event we're doing here. Let me just share a window real quick. If you're in Salt Lake, we are doing Top Golf with Fivetran Snowflake this Thursday, 3 p.m. Sign up. It's going to be a lot of fun if you're into golf and data. So, and also next week, Monday Morning Data Chat, we have the legend, Bill Inman, father of the data warehouse, joining us. So he's been it's been fun. We've been chatting quite a bit with Bill Inman lately about a variety of topics. So he's a cool guy. Agreed to be on the show. So he's going to be talking about some of the stuff he's working on. It's really cool. I mean, he could definitely retire at this point, and he's just still pushing. I think the boundaries of data and what he's doing. I think it's really inspiring. So it's cool. And then this Friday we have Jay Yu from Tiger Graph going to be on the show talking about all things graph databases. And then the Friday on the 22nd, we have Zhamak Degani talking about data mesh. So stacked roster. Hope you can join. Like I said, if you're in Salt Lake, let's do some Top Golf, get some drinks. So Emilie, awesome to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks to the audience for the great questions. So see you next time.